Welcome to our channel.
Chapter 1. A Summer Invitation to Ivy Cottage. The first warmth of June had coaxed every rosebush in St Mary Mead into bloom, so the tiny railway halt smelled faintly of tea rose and diesel when Jessica Fletcher stepped onto the platform. She paused a moment, drinking in the scene with the quiet delight of a born observer. The thatches beyond the hedgerow, the postman cycling past with a jaunty whistle, and, most telling of all, the quick, conspiratorial nod exchanged by two women outside the ticket office. In Cabot Cove, such gestures usually presaged gossip about the lobster catch. In rural England, they suggested something subtler and infinitely more interesting. Jessica had come at the invitation of Miss Emily Carter, a spry widow of literary inclinations who kept an enviable collection of first editions at Ivy Cottage. Emily bustled forward now, tweed skirts swishing, grey curls escaping her hat. "Jessica, my dear, the village has been positively buzzing since I mentioned you were arriving for our fête weekend. You've no idea the excitement." "I'm flattered," Jessica replied, accepting a kiss on the cheek. "Though I suspect the fête itself provides ample entertainment." "True," Emily laughed, steering her guest towards the waiting trap of a small Morris saloon. "But your reputation for unravelling difficulties precedes you." Jessica arched an eyebrow. "Difficulties? You'll see." Emily's tone was light, yet her fingers tightened a fraction on the steering wheel. "File that away," Jessica told herself. In her experience, casual words often concealed important threads. Ivy Cottage proved as enchanting as its name, all mullioned windows and lavender beds. Over a luncheon of cold chicken and coronation salad, Emily introduced the principal players in village life. There was Colonel Harcourt, retirement making him both gruff and bored, Reverend Phelps, earnest but rumoured to be unsteady on parish finances, Dr. Imogen Blake, whose modern manner jarred with the older residents, and young Claire Goodwin, an art student staying at the vicarage while painting the Fates advertising poster. At the centre of tomorrow's festivities, Emily explained, stood Albert Finch, proprietor of Finch's Fine Wines and donor of the annual harvest punch. "Albert is a stickler," she confided. "He guards his recipe as if it were the crown jewels." Jessica smiled, but she noticed how Emily's face clouded briefly. "Is Mr. Finch unpopular?" "Oh, not exactly unpopular," Emily hedged. "Merely respected from a safe distance. He's a widower, and success has made him particular. Still, the fête wouldn't be the same without his punch." They moved to the sitting room for coffee. Sunlight filtered through wisteria draped over the casement, dappling the carpet in lilac shadows. Emily fetched a photograph. Albert Finch, glass in hand, presiding over last year's stall. Opposite him in the snapshot stood one Lydia Armitage, schoolmistress, her expression watchful, almost wary. "Funny," Jessica murmured, "how a camera sometimes captures more than the eye sees." Emily tilted her head. "Lydia and Albert have been at odds," she admitted. "Lydia thinks his punch encourages over-merriment. He calls her puritanical. Nothing serious, I'm sure." Perhaps, Jessica thought, though she was seldom convinced by surface harmony. That evening they strolled to the green. Preparations for the fête painted a cheerful tableau. Bunting flapped, children rehearsed a maypole dance, and Claire Goodwin knelt by her easel, adding daubs of gold to a banner, "St Mary Mead, Summer Fête and Charity Auction," while Colonel Harcourt barked advice about proportions. "Miss Fletcher," Claire waved, leaving a smudge of paint on her cheek. "Emily told me you write mysteries. I adore a good puzzle." Jessica returned the wave. "Life supplies more than enough puzzles, I find." "Too true," drawled Dr. Blake, arriving with a medical bag. "I've a surgery full of hay fever sufferers today. If the Colonel orders one more military-grade drill for these stalls, Half the village will be sneezing at attention. Her joke drew polite laughter, but Jessica noted how Reverend Phelps avoided the doctor's gaze, busying himself with a ledger on a trestle. Moments later, Finch's van rumbled up, its livery, Finch and Son Vintners established, 1899, gleaming in the setting sun. Albert Finch climbed down, tall, silver-haired, immaculate in a linen suit quite out of keeping with the dusty field. He directed two youths to unload demijohns into the refreshment tent, inspecting each label as though conducting a military parade. When one bottle clinked against another, he winced visibly. "Careful, boy, we can't afford a single crack." Colonel Harcourt bristled at Finch's tone. "They're doing their best, man." Finch's smile was thin. "Colonel, you of all people understand precision." A neat riposte, Jessica thought, yet the Colonel's fists clenched behind his back. Tensions, small but tangible, rippled beneath the fate's cheerful veneer. Tensions that might, under the right provocation, snap. Night fell softly over the village, bringing a hush, broken only by the chirr of crickets. Jessica, unable to sleep, sat at her bedroom window with a notebook. Backlit by the moon, the wisteria looked like strands of purple smoke, and from somewhere beyond the hedges drifted faint strains of argument, muffled voices, one male, one female, urgent, then abruptly cut off. She strained to distinguish words, but a barn owl's cry masked them. Lights winked out one by one along the lane. Silence returned, but not serenity. The air felt charged, as if the village itself were holding its breath. Jessica jotted names, relationships, and those little inconsistencies that often proved vital. The Colonel's temper, Reverend Phelps's murmured apology to Dr. Blake. For what? Lydia's cautious stare, Finch's brittle perfectionism, and the wisteria, for earlier, in Emily's sitting room, a single blossom had fallen onto Finch's photograph, covering Lydia's face entirely. A meaningless coincidence, surely. Yet Jessica had learned never to dismiss symbol or omen. At 11:30, the cottage clock chimed. She closed the notebook. Tomorrow's fate would unfold like a well-thumbed play, each actor stepping into the light. With luck, no tragedy would appear in the final act. But luck, Jessica suspected, was already in short supply. She rose at dawn to the scent of baking bread and distant church bells. Emily was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, whisking eggs for a Victoria sponge. "You're an early bird," she said. "I wanted to stroll around the green before the crowds." Jessica accepted a cup of tea. "Fresh eyes sometimes spot what sleepy ones miss." Emily's expression turned rueful. "You really are hunting a mystery where none exists, my dear." "Not hunting," Jessica corrected gently. "Merely observing. Observation is a harmless pastime." "Harmless?" Emily echoed, a shadow crossing her face. Before Jessica could probe, a rap sounded at the door. Claire burst in, cheeks flushed. "Mrs. Carter, Miss Fletcher, something awful," she gasped. "Mr. Finch, he's lying in the refreshment tent and he won't wake up." Emily dropped her spoon. Yolk splattered across the counter. Jessica set down her cup with measured calm. "Claire, breathe. Is he conscious at all?" "No," the girl whispered, tears brimming. "And there's blood on a broken demijohn." Outside, a raven croaked, harsh against the soft morning light. Jessica reached for her jacket. "Emily, telephone Dr. Blake at once. Claire, show me." As they hurried down the garden path, Jessica noted every detail. Claire's paint-stained sleeve, the fine crack in her glasses, and the smear of red wine, or was it blood, on her fingertips. Above them, the wisteria swayed in a breeze that felt suddenly chill, as though the village itself shivered at what lay ahead. So much for harmless observation, Jessica thought. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, a whisper. Watch the wisteria. It climbs where it will. Chapter 2. The crimson spill beneath the canvas. The fate green was eerily quiet, blanketed in a strange hush that seemed to muffle even the birds. Jessica followed Claire across the dew-slick grass, the soft squelch beneath her sensible shoes, the only sound for several steps. The refreshment tent, usually a hive of early bustle, stood silent. Its flaps trembled in the breeze. Inside, the scent hit her first, sharp, sour, unmistakably wine, and something else underneath, metallic, cloying. Blood. Albert Finch lay half-slumped against a canvas support pole, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath him, the other stretched toward the table where the demijohns sat. His lips were slightly parted. A half-empty glass lay on its side nearby, its crimson contents soaked into the canvas rug. Jessica noted the cut on his temple and the jagged neck of a broken demijohn beside him. Shards glittered like jagged teeth. Jessica knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Claire hovered in the doorway, wringing her paint-splattered hands. I thought he was just asleep," she whispered. "Then I saw the glass and the blood." Jessica placed 2 fingers to Finch's throat. No pulse. The man was cold. Rigor hadn't fully set in yet, suggesting he'd died during the night, perhaps hours ago. There was no bottle of punch in sight, but the small wine barrel he always used for the final mixing sat uncorked nearby. Its contents, thick and red, pooled at its base where it had tipped over. She stood slowly. "Claire, I need you to stay calm and do something for me." Claire nodded, wide-eyed. "Go straight to Dr. Blake's surgery. Tell her to come at once. Then find Reverend Phelps. He'll know how to keep the villagers away from the scene until the police arrive." Claire hesitated, then ran. Jessica remained a moment longer, examining the area. The canvas floor bore faint marks, footprints, too vague to say, but a handprint, smudged in wine or blood, stained the flap of the tent. The broken demijohn concerned her. It was unusually shattered, suggesting a forceful blow, not an accidental fall. Had it been a blunt instrument, or an attempted cover-up? She carefully stepped outside, just as Emily arrived in a flurry of skirts and concern. "Jessica," Claire said, "Oh dear Lord." "I'm afraid it's true," Jessica said gently. "Albert Finch is dead, possibly murdered." Emily looked pale. "I'll ring the constable." "Please do. Also tell him to contact Scotland Yard. I have a feeling they'll need someone experienced." Emily nodded and turned back toward the cottage. By mid-morning, the fete ground had transformed. Reverend Phelps had roped off the area around the tent with colourful bunting, and curious villagers now stood behind the makeshift barrier, whispering in tight knots. The colonel paced irritably, muttering about ruined traditions and unsettled schedules. Dr. Imogen Blake arrived and confirmed the death, though she made no pronouncement beyond the obvious trauma to Finch's head. "I'd say between 11 and midnight," she told Jessica, kneeling beside the body with professional precision. "Blow to the head, possibly fatal, but I'll know more after the coroner sees him. No defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, oddly enough." "Curious," Jessica murmured. "And the blood?" "From the cut, but there's wine mixed in with it, which complicates things." Jessica's brow furrowed. "So either he fell onto a broken demijohn or someone used it as a weapon." "Precisely." "And the punch?" Jessica gestured to the wine barrel. Dr. Blake shook her head. "I wouldn't touch it if I were you. Could be poisoned, though there's no clear sign. I've taken a sample for testing." Jessica stepped aside to allow the constable, young P.C. Dwyer, well-meaning but visibly nervous, to photograph the scene. "Terrible business, Mrs. Fletcher," he said. "First time I've had to deal with, a body." "Do you reckon it's murder? proper? I don't speculate without cause, she said gently, but I do notice things. And she had noticed quite a bit already. Back at Ivy Cottage, Jessica sat at Emily's desk with a fresh cup of tea, reviewing her notes. The suspects, while not formally named, had begun to coalesce in her mind. 1. Claire Goodwin. Found the body, paint on her hands and a fine crack in her glasses. Was she really just a bystander? 2. Reverend Phelps. Had avoided looking at Dr. Blake the night before, seemed strained. Could the church's accounts have tied him to Finch? 3. Colonel Harcourt openly clashed with Finch over authority and tradition. His temper was no secret. 4. Lydia Armitage, schoolmistress, disapproved of the punch, possibly moral motivation. 5. Dr. Blake herself, calm, efficient, but someone had called her cold. Was she involved more than professionally? Jessica recalled the overheard voices the night before. One had been female, sharp, and insistent. The other low and clipped, very possibly Finch. Could it have been Lydia confronting him? Or even Emily? That last thought gave her pause. Her hostess had been slightly evasive when Jessica first mentioned village difficulties, and she hadn't seemed shocked by the death, merely resigned. That afternoon, Jessica visited the village shop under the pretense of buying local jam. In a place like St Mary Mead, information flowed faster than honey from a spoon. "You ask me," said Mrs. Tumley, the grocer's wife. "It were Lydia what finally snapped. Always hissing about the punch, she was. Said it made the children disrespectful." Another woman chimed in. "I heard she went to the council, tried to have Albert's booth moved next to the compost heap." "Didn't he write a letter?" a third offered. "To the paper. Called her a dried-up scold." "Poison in print, I say." Jessica thanked them and walked out with her jar of gooseberry jam and a dozen more questions. That evening, while the sun dipped low behind the hills, she returned to the Fête Green. The refreshment tent had been cordoned off, but Jessica stepped inside briefly before it was sealed. Her eyes caught something she hadn't noticed before. A small brown leather-bound notebook, almost hidden beneath the edge of the collapsed barrel. Finch's personal tasting journal. She flicked through quickly, finding neat handwritten notes on acidity, tannins and blends. But on the final page was a crude ink scrawl in a different hand. "Stop the punch, or I will stop you." There was no signature. Jessica's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just dislike or village gossip. Someone had threatened Finch directly, and perhaps acted on that threat. Chapter 3. Shadows Beneath the Ivy. The notebook sat heavy in Jessica's handbag as she walked back to Ivy Cottage under the first blush of twilight. The village green behind her still bore the faint imprint of confusion, a toppled maypole ribbon, an abandoned picnic blanket, and, beyond the ropes, the outline of the refreshment tent now guarded by a lone constable. Inside the leather cover of Albert Finch's wine journal was the page Jessica couldn't stop thinking about. "Stop the punch, or I will stop you." The ink was smeared, not entirely fresh, and likely written with a fountain pen. Not Finch's usual style. His own entries were meticulous, wine-stained at the edges, but otherwise controlled and precise. This message was jagged, angry, rushed, and anonymous. Back at Ivy Cottage, Emily was in the parlour with a glass of sherry, the radio softly playing a classical piano sonata. She looked up as Jessica entered. "Any news from the police?" Jessica sat opposite her. "The inspector from Scotland Yard will arrive tomorrow morning. Until then, it's up to the constable to hold the scene secure." Emily took a sip. "Poor Dwyer, he's barely out of school, poor lamb." Jessica smiled faintly. "Emily, do you know if Albert Finch kept any sort of enemies, personal ones?" Emily hesitated. Not enemies exactly, but there were complications. Such as? Well, the business with the school charity fund last year. Lydia accused him of manipulating the auction results in his favour. He claimed he'd simply outbid everyone fairly. There were harsh words, but surely nothing worth killing over. Jessica tapped her fingers on the armrest. Did you know Finch kept a private wine journal? Emily nodded slowly. Yes, but he was secretive about it. Never let anyone read it. I found it hidden behind the wine barrel. That gave Emily pause. You think it was deliberately hidden? I think someone left a threatening message in it. Whether they meant to follow through or not is another matter. She leaned forward. Emily, did you hear anything unusual last night, around midnight? Emily frowned. Yes. Now you mention it. I heard a bottle smash. I thought it was just someone being careless with supplies. Then silence. Jessica nodded. I heard voices from my window. 2 people arguing. Emily paled slightly. I didn't hear that. Jessica stood. I'd like to pay Reverend Phelps a visit. The vicarage stood at the far end of the village, half covered in trailing ivy and flanked by tidy garden beds. The door was answered not by the Reverend, but by Claire Goodwin, the art student, now wearing spectacles hastily mended with tape. Oh, Miss Fletcher, he's in the study. Claire led her inside, glancing nervously behind. Did you know Mr. Finch well, Claire? Jessica asked casually. Claire paused. He was generous with advice, but also a little intense. Intense how? He once criticized my painting quite strongly, said I lacked formality and structure. He frightened me a little. She looked down. I don't think I'll finish the fête banner now. Jessica gave her a reassuring touch on the arm. You've been very helpful. She stepped into the study where Reverend Phelps sat at his desk, head bowed over a pile of papers. He rose when he saw her. Mrs. Fletcher, I imagine this isn't a social call. I'm afraid not, Reverend. I found something troubling at the scene. She placed the wine journal on the desk and opened to the final page. He read the message, his face growing pale. Good heavens! Do you recognize the handwriting? He didn't answer at once, then quietly. I believe. It may be Lydia Armitage's. Jessica wasn't surprised. What makes you say that? 2 weeks ago, she came to me in confidence. She said she believed Finch was adding something illegal to the punch. Alcohol, of course, but she suspected something chemical. She even said she might confront him the night before the fête. And did she? I don't know, but she was very passionate. She's always believed he corrupted the children with his charm and brewery showmanship. Her words. Jessica noted that. And you, Reverend, were you concerned about the punch? Phelps hesitated. We've had complaints. 2 parishioners became ill last year. I asked Finch to let me review the recipe. He refused. Did you ever threaten to cancel the punch entirely? I may have implied as much, but I didn't want a war on my hands. Jessica stood. Thank you, Reverend. You've been honest. I hope you'll remain so. Night had fallen by the time Jessica returned to the green. She'd expected quiet, but she wasn't alone. Under the glow of a flickering lamppost stood Dr. Imogen Blake, cigarette in hand, gazing at the tent. Mrs. Fletcher, she said, exhaling slowly. Can't sleep either? Something like that. Jessica walked closer. You were the last to see Finch alive, weren't you? Blake raised an eyebrow. Why do you think that? He was dead before dawn. No one claims to have seen him after dinner. Except you were already on site early, weren't you? Setting up your first aid booth? Dr. Blake nodded. He came by to drop off some crates around 10. Told me he was staying late to guard the punch barrel. Seemed on edge. Did he mention anything unusual? He muttered something about someone interfering with tradition. Sounded like Lydia, but who knows? Everyone had a reason to be irritated with him. Jessica considered that. He was carrying a notebook? Yes. Always scribbling. He said the punch was different this year. Different how? He didn't say, but I got the feeling he was changing the formula, perhaps to one-up his critics. Jessica looked again at the sealed tent, her thoughts swirling. A secret punch formula, a threatened schoolteacher, a warning scrawled in fury, a wine blend possibly altered, and 5 people each with motive, opportunity, or both. The answers were circling closer. She just needed one more crack in the facade to see the truth behind the wisteria-covered smiles. Chapter 4. The Missing Measure. The morning mist curled lazily across the cobblestones of St Mary Mead, casting the village in a haze of ghostly calm. Jessica Fletcher sat on the bench just outside the bakery, her notebook open on her lap, untouched tea cooling beside her. She had written 5 names at the top of the page, beneath each a motive or suspicion. Some were solid, others more shadow than substance. Yet each pointed to the same tangled knot, Albert Finch. And the truth, she was certain, lay not in the drama of his death, but in the details of his drink. Across the green, Lydia Armitage emerged from the schoolhouse. Tall, thin, and always neatly buttoned, she strode with the determined purpose of someone long used to silence. Jessica stood, intercepting her on the gravel path. "Miss Armitage," she said with a polite nod. "Mrs. Fletcher." Lydia's tone was stiff. "I assume this isn't a chat about the school's Latin curriculum." "No," Jessica admitted. "I wanted to ask you about Mr. Finch." Lydia stiffened. "I suppose everyone thinks I'm a murderer now." "I think a great many people are hiding truths," Jessica said gently. "That doesn't make them murderers." Lydia hesitated. "Come inside. I won't have this conversation where Mrs. Tumley can see me through her curtains." The school's common room was lined with bookcases and smelled faintly of chalk and tea biscuits. Jessica accepted a cup without milk as Lydia sat across from her, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against the saucer. "You threatened Mr. Finch," Jessica said without preamble. "There's a message in his journal, handwriting consistent with yours." Lydia didn't flinch. "Yes, I wrote it. I didn't mean it literally." "What did you mean?" "I meant I'd go to the fête committee, demand the punch be tested. There were rumors, you know. Last year, 2 teenagers were taken ill. I believed he was adding something stronger than wine." "Like what?" "I couldn't say. Some sort of liqueur, perhaps. I even approached Reverend Phelps, but he urged me to be cautious, said I lacked proof." Jessica nodded slowly. "And on the night of his death?" "I did go to confront him. Around 10:15, I was angry. He called me a moral dinosaur and said the punch was perfect this year, a masterpiece. Then he turned his back on me and waved me off. I left. I was furious, not homicidal." "Did he seem nervous?" "Strangely, yes. He'd locked up the punch barrel already and wouldn't let me near it." Jessica made a note. "One last question. Do you know what black violet is?" Lydia frowned. "A type of liqueur, isn't it? I saw it once in his storeroom during the school auction. Bitter smell. Why?" "Because I think he added it to the punch this year, and someone found out." Jessica next paid a visit to the local chemist, a tidy shop run by a brusque woman named Edith Branson. "Black violet," Edith said, adjusting her spectacles. "Good Lord, yes, I know it. Horrid stuff. Bittersweet, almost syrupy. Legal, but not common. Mostly used by vintners as an infusion. Adds depth to a blend, but dangerous if mixed with the wrong compound." Jessica's pulse quickened. Could it interact badly with certain medicines? "Oh, very badly," Edith said. "Anything with a nitrate compound, blood thinners, even basic sedatives. Why do you ask?" "Curiosity," Jessica replied, mind spinning. Do you know who's bought it recently? No sales this year, but if someone had leftover stock, they might have used it. Finch had been mixing his punch in secret, changing the recipe. If he'd added something like black violet, perhaps to make his punch more memorable or sophisticated, it could have had unintended or intended consequences. Back at Ivy Cottage, Emily met her with a telegram from Inspector Barnum at Scotland Yard. He would arrive within the hour. Jessica retreated to the garden to think. The wisteria swayed gently above, whispering its secrets in the breeze. She laid out the evidence in her mind like pieces on a chessboard. Finch was working on a new formula. Someone knew about it and tried to stop him. The punch barrel had spilled, likely in a struggle. Finch had a wound to the head, possibly accidental. But what if? The punch wasn't the weapon, but the trap. A gust of wind carried a sharp scent to her nostrils, wisteria and something else. She turned. Claire stood at the garden gate, clutching a bundle of painting supplies. I didn't want to interrupt, she said. I just brought the fête banner. I thought maybe someone should finish it. Jessica smiled kindly. That's thoughtful of you, Claire. Tell me, did you drink the punch last year? Claire blinked. Only a sip. It was too bitter for me. But my friend Elsie had 2 glasses and fainted during the raffle. Her mum blamed the heat. I'm sure, Jessica murmured. You're quite precise with your brushwork. Do you do any work in ink? Claire's brow furrowed. Sometimes, for sketch outlines. Why? Jessica smiled, just curious. Inspector Barnum arrived promptly at noon, tall, red-faced, and impeccably skeptical. Small village, big scandal, he muttered as Jessica led him to the scene. She laid out her theory calmly. I don't believe Albert Finch was murdered with a bottle. I think he drank his own punch, only this time it contained something fatal. Barnum scoffed. Suicide? No, Jessica said evenly. He wouldn't poison his own masterpiece. I believe someone tampered with the punch knowing Finch would taste it first, as he always did. So you suspect poisoning? Yes, with a compound that interacts badly with a bitter liqueur called black violet, which Finch used to enhance his blend. Barnum narrowed his eyes. And who do you believe added the other ingredient? I'm not sure yet, but I do know this. Finch never got to serve the punch. The barrel was found half empty, spilt, as though someone had tried to destroy the evidence. Barnum crossed his arms. You're saying the killer never intended to leave a body? Just a tragic accident? An old man heart attack, perhaps? Exactly, Jessica said. But he fell, hit his head. That's what made it murder. Barnum's expression softened, intrigued. And you have a suspect? Not yet, Jessica said, eyes fixed on the ivy beyond the tent. But I have a very short list. Chapter 5. A drop too bitter. Jessica Fletcher stood outside Finch and Son Vintners, staring up at the weathered sign creaking in the breeze. The shop had been shuttered since Albert Finch's death, the glass darkened, the brass doorknob tarnished with age and disuse. But Jessica hadn't come for the wine. She had come for the ledger. Earlier that morning, after speaking with the inspector, she had asked Emily a single question. Who held the spare key to Finch's premises? Emily hadn't needed to think. Claire Goodwin. Albert let her use the upstairs storeroom for painting, said the light was better. Thought he was encouraging a creative mind. I thought it odd myself. So did Jessica. Claire's involvement in the mystery had seemed peripheral. She was young, seemingly gentle, talented with a brush, and prone to fluster. But there had been small things, a nervous energy, a reluctance to speak too freely about Finch, and that broken pair of spectacles. She hadn't mentioned painting in the wine shop. Jessica reached into her coat pocket and withdrew the spare key given reluctantly by Emily. It clicked in the lock with an audible snap. The air inside was close, scented with aged cork and dried currant. Dust motes danced in the light pouring through the storeroom window. Upstairs, the painting space looked largely untouched. Easel, paints, a half-finished canvas of the village fete. And beside it, on a small side table, sat a ledger. Jessica opened it gently. It wasn't a wine inventory, it was a guest book. Names, dates, tasting notes. Beside each entry, Finch had written comments in shorthand, over-talkative. Politely dismissed. Impressionable. Knows too much? Claire's name appeared 3 times. The final entry. Claire, persistent. Prying, do not invite again. Jessica frowned. Claire had said Finch frightened her, but she had kept coming back. Why? A glint in the light caught her eye, an ink bottle, uncorked, the same distinctive brown ink used in the journal note. Stop the punch, or I will stop you. Jessica leaned closer. A brush lay beside it. The bristles were stiff, ink-stained, not paint-smeared. A sketchbook sat beneath. Flipping it open, she found pages of sharp, detailed illustrations of wine bottles, flasks, and Finch. His likeness appeared again and again. Some drawings were flattering, others showed him with harsh lines, exaggerated brows, and a broken demijohn clutched in one hand. One drawing showed a barrel. It had a large black X across it, and scrawled beneath in pencil the phrase, "He ruined everything." Jessica closed the sketchbook softly, her mind beginning to whir. Claire had lied, not directly but through omission, and someone who sketches threats is very close to making them real. She found Claire later in the village garden, watering peonies outside the vicarage. "You didn't tell me you painted at Finch's shop," Jessica said evenly. Claire froze, watering, suspended mid-air. He let me use the upstairs room just sometimes, for quiet." "And you left your sketchbook there?" Claire's hands tightened. "Did you go through my things?" "I'm trying to solve a murder," Jessica replied gently. "And you've been keeping secrets?" Claire set the can down with a thud. "He made me feel small, like everything I did was childish, even when I tried to help him design a new label. He mocked it." "You tried to help him?" "Yes. He mentioned wanting to rebrand his summer blend. I said I could do something modern, elegant. He told me art had no place in wine." Jessica nodded. "Did you see what he added to the punch this year?" Claire hesitated. "Black violet. He bragged about it, said it would silence his critics." "Did you drink it?" "I never touched it again, not after he told me what it could do in the right hands." Jessica's breath caught. "Did he say that exactly?" "He said, used properly, black violet can make fools into philosophers and loudmouths into corpses." I thought he was joking. Jessica stared at the young woman. "Claire, did you tamper with the punch?" "No, I was scared of it, yes, but I didn't touch it." Her voice cracked. "I went to the tent around 11 to collect the sketchbook I left behind. I heard someone inside arguing. I panicked and ran." "Who was arguing?" Claire swallowed. "A woman. She said something like, 'You've pushed too far this time,' and then glass breaking. I didn't wait." Jessica stepped back. "Thank you, Claire. You've been more helpful than you know." Back at the green, Jessica found Inspector Barnum at the refreshment tent. "I need access to the punch barrel," she said. "There's something I need to test." He nodded. "We've already collected a sample." "Yes, but have you tested for valeryl nitrate?" He blinked. "That's an industrial solvent." "It's also found in some artisanal ink formulas, specifically those used in calligraphy and sketching. If that chemical interacted with the bitter compounds in black violet..." His eyes widened. "It would create a toxic reaction, even in small amounts." Jessica nodded. I believe someone didn't mean to kill Albert Finch. They meant to ruin his punch, perhaps to stop him serving it. But the mixture became deadly, and he, ever the perfectionist, tested it first. Barnum considered. And the wine barrel tipped over in the struggle. Jessica added, "It may have been an accident, until it wasn't." That evening, Jessica sat in Emily's parlour once again, the scent of lavender mixing with the tang of old ink. "I know who did it," she said quietly. But the motive wasn't hatred, it was fear, and a desire to protect others. Emily looked up from her knitting. "Who?" Jessica's eyes turned toward the garden, where the wisteria swayed gently in the breeze. Chapter 6. The Confession Among the Vines. Ivy Cottage glowed golden in the late afternoon sun. The garden, swept clean of petals and polished by dew, was peaceful now, deceptively so. Beneath the great trellis of blooming wisteria, Emily had set out tea, 3 plates of shortbread, and 5 wicker chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Jessica stood at the French doors, watching as the guests arrived one by one. Colonel Harcourt was first, all stiffness and scowl, flanked shortly by Reverend Phelps, whose clerical collar looked too tight for his own nerves. Lydia Armitage arrived moments later, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. Then came Claire, hesitant and pale. Finally, Dr. Imogen Blake stepped into the garden, cool and unreadable. "Quite the gathering," Emily whispered as she poured the tea. Jessica smiled faintly. Sometimes the truth emerges not from solitude, but from friction. She waited until the cups were full, the silence thick enough to slice. "I've called you all here," she said clearly, "because I now understand how Albert Finch died, and more importantly, why." Colonel Harcourt grunted. "If this is some sort of parlour theatre." "It isn't," Jessica said calmly. "It's an explanation of how pride, fear and bitterness mixed into a deadly concoction, one that claimed a man's life." She turned first to Lydia. "You confronted Finch the night of his death. You admitted that to me. You saw the punch barrel already sealed, and you left angry, but not violent. You're not the one who added the chemical." Lydia said nothing, but her face loosened with quiet relief. Jessica turned to Reverend Phelps. "You knew about Lydia's concerns. You believed them serious enough to raise with Finch yourself, but he dismissed you. What you didn't expect was that someone else, someone less patient, might take matters further." He nodded slowly. "I never imagined it would come to this." Jessica turned to Claire. "You've been near the truth the entire time. Sketching in the wine shop, working with ink, hearing voices the night of the murder. But you didn't poison the punch either, did you?" Claire looked up, trembling. "Number, I swear I didn't." "But you did accidentally leave something behind," Jessica continued. "Your calligraphy ink, the same ink that contains valeryl nitrate. Finch hated your sketches, your modernity." He poured some of that ink into the punch barrel, thinking it was a bitter additive, or perhaps part of his masterpiece, not knowing it would interact with the black violet he had already added. Claire blinked. "You mean he poisoned himself?" Jessica hesitated. "Partly, but that's not the whole truth." She turned now to Dr. Imogen Blake. "You arrived at the fête early. You told me you were the first to see Finch that night. But that wasn't the truth, was it? You saw him earlier, when he was already in distress. Everyone turned." Jessica continued, voice quiet and even. "You examined the body before calling the police. You saw he had collapsed, likely poisoned, but still alive. And that's when you made a choice. You tipped the wine barrel, made it look like chaos, and when he tried to stand, you struck him with the broken demijohn." Dr. Blake's fingers twitched ever so slightly. "You had your reasons," Jessica said. You'd seen what Finch had done to others. Humiliated Claire. Pushed Lydia to the edge, pressured the Reverend, but you had your own motive. She reached into her bag and held up a folded paper. An email from the medical board. Your license had been flagged. One more complaint and you'd be struck off. Last year, 2 villagers fell ill after drinking Finch's punch. You treated them but never reported the incident, did you? Dr. Blake's mouth was dry. Jessica pressed on. You knew Finch's new blend was dangerous. He wouldn't listen, so when he drank it and collapsed, you finished it. Not out of rage, out of fear. You couldn't afford another scandal. The silence was deafening. Then, with a long breath, Dr. Blake said softly, He was choking when I arrived. Clutching at his chest. I didn't know what he'd taken. But I recognized the signs. I knew if the punch was tested, and they traced it back to last year's complaints, I'd be blamed. He'd never admit fault. So yes, I tipped the barrel. And when he stirred, I panicked. It was a single blow. She looked around the circle. I didn't mean for anyone else to suffer. I was trying to end a lie before it destroyed more lives. Jessica nodded slowly. But the truth has a way of seeping through, like ink in water. Inspector Barnum arrived an hour later to take Dr. Blake into custody. She didn't resist. As she passed Jessica, she murmured, You always intended for me to confess, didn't you? Jessica replied gently, No one ever believes they will. But in a garden full of truth, it's hard to lie for long. That evening, with the last of the fuss behind them, Emily brought Jessica a cup of tea on the garden bench beneath the wisteria. You saw it all coming, she said, impressed, even from the first day. I saw the cracks, Jessica replied. Not the whole shape, not at first, but when you listen long enough, everyone tells you who they are. She looked up at the swaying blossoms, even the wisteria. To be continued in Chapter 7, The Wine-Stained Legacy, where Jessica reflects on Finch's hidden journal entries, makes one final visit to the wine cellar, and uncovers a sealed envelope that changes her understanding of everything. Shall I continue with Chapter 7? You said yes. ChatGPT said story title. Jessica Fletcher and the Whisper in the Wisteria, Chapter 7, The Wine-Stained Legacy, word count approximately 1,000. 2 days had passed since Dr. Imogen Blake's quiet confession beneath the wisteria vines, and yet Jessica Fletcher remained in St Mary Mead. Officially, she'd stayed to help Emily host the rescheduled fête tea table and to draft a short article for the Cabot Cove Gazette. Unofficially, she had one more thread to follow. Albert Finch was dead. His pride, his secrecy, and his obsession with legacy had led him to a concoction that proved fatal. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had been left unsaid. Dr. Blake may have delivered the final blow, but the motive felt incomplete, too clinical, too clean. That morning, she walked once again to Finch & Son Vintners. The door was still padlocked, but the constable had left her the cellar key under Inspector Barnum's instruction. Jessica let herself in and descended into the gloom. The air was damp and cool. Wooden barrels lined the walls, each labelled in Finch's precise handwriting. The cellar had the same obsessive order as the man himself, everything measured, dated and ranked. On the far wall hung a single brass plaque that read, For Thomas, the future of the vineyard. Jessica frowned. Thomas? Finch had no children, at least none anyone had mentioned. She turned slowly, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. In the corner, beneath a stack of tasting crates, stood an antique cabinet with a small locked drawer. She knelt and slid a pin from her blouse cuff, a habit learned from years of less than cooperative evidence, and jimmied the lock. It clicked open. Inside lay a thin envelope. The edges were stained with wine and thyme. Across the front, in faded ink, were the words, "To be opened only upon my death." Jessica hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of vellum stationery, a letter, handwritten, and as she read, the final layer of the mystery fell into place. "To whom it may concern, my name is Albert Jonathan Finch. This letter is my final testament, not in legal matters, but in personal ones. Many in this village think me cold, a perfectionist. They are right. I have lived with bitterness for many years." Chapter 7. The Wine-Stained Legacy. 2 days had passed since Dr. Imogen Blake's quiet confession beneath the Wisteria vines, and yet Jessica Fletcher remained in St Mary Mead. Officially, she'd stayed to help Emily host the rescheduled fête tea table and to draft a short article for the Cabot Cove Gazette. Unofficially, she had one more thread to follow. Albert Finch was dead. His pride, his secrecy, and his obsession with legacy had led him to a concoction that proved fatal. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had been left unsaid. Dr. Blake may have delivered the final blow, but the motive felt incomplete, too clinical, too clean. That morning, she walked once again to Finch and Son Vintners. The door was still padlocked, but the constable had left her the cellar key under Inspector Barnum's instruction. Jessica let herself in and descended into the gloom. The air was damp and cool. Wooden barrels lined the walls, each labelled in Finch's precise handwriting. The cellar had the same obsessive order as the man himself, everything measured, dated, and ranked. On the far wall hung a single brass plaque that read, "For Thomas, the future of the vineyard." Jessica frowned. Thomas. Finch had no children, at least none anyone had mentioned. She turned slowly, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. In the corner, beneath a stack of tasting crates, stood an antique cabinet with a small locked drawer. She knelt and slid a pin from her blouse cuff, a habit learned from years of less than cooperative evidence, and jimmied the lock. It clicked open. Inside lay a thin envelope. The edges were stained with wine and thyme. Across the front, in faded ink, were the words, "To be opened only upon my death." Jessica hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of vellum stationery, a letter, handwritten, and as she read, the final layer of the mystery fell into place. "To whom it may concern, my name is Albert Jonathan Finch. This letter is my final testament, not in legal matters, but in personal ones. Many in this village think me cold, a perfectionist. They are right. I have lived with bitterness for many years. 22 years ago, I fell in love with a woman named Eleanor Hart. She was brilliant, curious, and impossibly kind. She left me before I could ask her to stay. I was not the man she deserved. She had a son the following year. His name was Thomas. I do not know if he is mine, has she never said, but I suspect. 2 years ago, Thomas wrote to me under a pseudonym. He had discovered the possibility. I wrote back. We exchanged letters, never face to face. He refused to meet. He said he wanted nothing from me, only that I take care of someone named Claire. He called her like a sister, but the tone I suspected differently. When I saw Claire's sketches, I recognized something. Eleanor's lines, her talent, her fierce honesty. I offered her a space above the shop. Told her it was for the light. It wasn't. I wanted to protect her in my way. Even if I couldn't say why. If this letter is being read, I am gone. Please see to it that Claire receives what is due to her. There is a trust under the name Hart. She need only ask Mr. Phelps for the details. Tell her. I was proud, in the end. Jessica stared at the paper. Her heartbeat slowed. Albert Finch hadn't simply been a harsh mentor or village eccentric. He had been guarding something, someone, all along. And Claire, unwittingly or not, had always been closer to him than she knew. He'd been cruel, yes, prideful, but not heartless. She returned to Ivy Cottage to find Claire sitting on the garden bench, notebook in hand. She looked up, wary. "Miss Fletcher, I thought you'd gone." Jessica sat beside her. "Claire, do you know a man named Thomas Hart?" Claire blinked. "My mum's friend? I only met him twice. He sent me letters once when I was studying in London. Said he'd been close with her in school." Jessica smiled. "He thought of you as family?" Claire looked puzzled. "Why are you asking?" Jessica handed her the letter. Claire read silently, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't... He suspected? But I never knew. Mum never told me." Jessica touched her hand. "It doesn't change what happened, but it changes why it mattered. Finch gave you a place, not just because he was difficult, but because, in his way, he was trying to make amends." Claire wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "And now he's gone." "Yes," Jessica said, "but he left something behind." She explained the mention of the trust and the envelope Claire could now present to Reverend Phelps. "I'm not saying money solves anything," Jessica added softly, "but sometimes acknowledgement does." Claire nodded. "Thank you for seeing what I didn't." That evening, the fête was finally held. Modest, delayed, but no less joyful. The maypole turned, children ran with ribbons. The punch, replaced with lemonade, was served without incident. Jessica sat with Emily near the bandstand, watching laughter replace suspicion. "I must say," Emily remarked, "this has been quite the week." Jessica chuckled. "They usually are. Will you write about it?" "Of course," she smiled, "though I may change a few names." They sipped their tea as the sky darkened, the wisteria above them glowing violet in the soft lantern light. Chapter 8. The Final Toast. A warm dusk settled over St Mary Mead, the kind that lent even the oldest stones a golden sheen. The fête was winding down, streamers fluttered gently in the breeze, chairs clinked as they were folded and stacked, and laughter echoed from the children playing a final round of sack races across the green. The tension of the past week had finally eased its grip on the village. In the centre of it all stood a small round table draped in lace. Atop it rested 5 glasses of lemonade and a single glass of deep red wine, Albert Finch's final vintage, uncorked earlier by Reverend Phelps with a trembling hand. Jessica stood nearby with Emily, Claire, the Colonel, Lydia, and the Reverend, each solemn and silent, as the last of the sun dipped behind the village rooftops. Reverend Phelps cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, lifting his glass. "A toast." They turned to him. "To a man many of us knew, but few of us understood. Albert Finch was prideful, difficult, and entirely himself. He made a legacy, and, though he didn't show it easily, he cared deeply for wine, for tradition, and perhaps even for people." Jessica noticed Lydia glance down. The Colonel simply nodded once. Reverend Phelps continued. "Tonight, we honor his memory not by mourning his failings, but by acknowledging his intent. He tried to craft something lasting, and perhaps in the end he did." He held the glass aloft. "To Albert Finch." They echoed the toast quietly. Jessica didn't drink. Instead, she stepped forward and gently placed a small, folded note beside the glass. A copy of Finch's letter, its words now public record, but still private in its weight. Claire remained still for a moment, then stepped forward and placed her hand on the note, her expression unreadable. "I used to think he hated me," she said softly. "But maybe he was trying to find a way to love someone he wasn't sure he had the right to love." Jessica's heart ached at the quiet wisdom of the words. "You've handled this with grace," she told the girl. And now you get to decide what you want to carry forward and what to leave behind. Claire nodded. I'm going to art school in the autumn, properly this time. I think he'd have liked that, even if he'd say my sketches lack structure. Jessica smiled. Later, as the fête ended and lanterns dimmed, Emily brought Jessica one last cup of tea beneath the wisteria-covered trellis of ivy cottage. You never did say how you knew it was Dr. Blake, Emily said, handing her the china cup. Jessica sipped. It wasn't one thing, it was many. She confessed freely enough in the end. She did, but only because she realized the walls were closing in. Jessica leaned back and looked up at the vines above them. Dr. Blake had everything to lose, her reputation, her license, even her standing in a village that still doesn't always welcome outsiders. But she also had access, knowledge, and just enough proximity to believe she could fix what she thought was a mistake. Emily nodded slowly. Do you think she regrets it? Jessica tilted her head. I think she regrets the panic, the choice, but not the fear that drove her to it. Fear often has the loudest voice in a person's head. They sat for a moment, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves. You know, Emily added, I've often thought this village is like that Wisteria, beautiful from a distance, but underneath, vines everywhere. Jessica chuckled. And sometimes tangled enough to strangle a wall. But also strong, Emily said, and loyal. Jessica raised her teacup. To tangled roots, then. Emily raised hers in return. To the ones that hold us together. The next morning, Jessica packed her bag and stood at the garden gate, waiting for the car to the station. Claire arrived just in time, clutching a folded envelope. It's the first tuition payment, she said. From the trust. Reverend Phelps confirmed it yesterday. Jessica smiled. You've earned it, and more. Claire looked down. Will you, write about this in your next book? Jessica thought for a moment. Maybe not directly, she said. But the idea of something deadly hiding in a cup of wine, that sounds like fiction waiting to happen. They laughed quietly. The car horn tooted, and Jessica opened the gate. You'll come back? Claire asked. Jessica turned and smiled. St Mary Mead doesn't let go of people so easily. I'll be back. And with that, she stepped into the waiting car, the soft tendrils of wisteria brushing against her coat as the wind picked up behind her. As the car rolled away through the village, Jessica opened her notebook and jotted down her final thought. Not all murders are born of hate. Some are born of panic, of pride, or the quiet desperation of people clinging to control. But every story, no matter how tangled the root, leads back to the human heart. That's where the mystery always begins.